Hi everybody, so today I am going to demonstrate one of my favorite sourdough bread recipes. It was the very first recipe that I learned. It is perfect for a Monday through Friday during a busy work week. There's not a lot of hands-on time, and it is awesome for beginners who are still learning because it's not very complicated at all. So let's get started. All right, good morning. So it is 7:30 a.m. I just got my kids off to school, so we are going to go ahead and start our bread making process this morning, and then I'm going to pick it up actually later this afternoon when I get home from work. So the only thing that I need to do this morning is to create a levain, and what that is it is basically just a portion of your starter that you pre-mix so that you can go ahead and get a really strong fermentation before you start making your actual dough. So you can see here, I fed my starter last night. It was about here when I fed it. And now you can see it's come all the way up to here, and it's at its peak, and it's almost slightly started to dip just barely. So I think I'm still in good shape, but I'm gonna kind of give this a stir because this ripe starter is what's going to be the base for my levain this morning. So give that a good stir. Now you do want to measure all of your ingredients. I have done some recipes where people will use tablespoons and cups, but what I have found is the only way to be precise, and baking is a very precise process, is to measure your ingredients. So I started steering away from recipes that would say 3.5 cups of flour, 1 cup of water, because I wanted to know exactly how much of each component needed to be in the recipe, and you just don't get that unless you weigh them. So because I want to delay this process, I really don't want my levain to be fully fermented until I get home from work, which is going to be roughly 8.5 hours from now. I'm only going to use a very small bit of starter. So you're only going to use about 10 grams of starter this morning. The less starter you use, the longer time it's going to take for your levain to reach that peak. If you want it ready sooner, you just add more starter. You use the same recipe, you use the same components of flour and water, but you can just add more starter if you want it ready a little bit earlier, and you can kind of play around with that to figure out what's the perfect amount of starter, because also every starter is different. So sometimes you do have to adjust your times for your particular starter depending on how old it is. Younger starters are not going to peak as quickly versus more mature starters, is what I have noticed. My starter now is ready a lot sooner than it used to be. So I've got 10 grams of starter in my bowl, so I'm going to clear that, and I am going to add 81 grams of water. Now you do want your water to be lukewarm. Went a little bit over on the water, but that should be okay. But because I am who I am, I do like to be precise. So I'm gonna scoop a little bit of that out. So now I'm at 82, so that makes me feel better. So I'm gonna kind of mix this in, start getting my starter dissolved into the water a little bit before I put in my flour. Just helps it all come together a little bit faster, and you don't get clumps of starter. All right, so I'm gonna clear that. And now for this particular recipe, we're actually going to be using 2 types of flour. So I've got bread flour, which is a higher protein flour than regular all-purpose, and I have whole wheat flour. So we are going to add 40 grams of our whole wheat flour. And we are going to add 40 grams of our bread flour. See, there I go again. So I'm going to take a little dab out. Even though you probably do not have to be this precise, I like to be very precise. Now I'm going to move this. I'm going to stir this in. And this is going to be the base of the dough that I make later tonight. So anytime you're stirring a flour water mixture, you really just want to make sure that all the flour gets wet, because eventually it will absorb into the mixture if it's wet. If there's dry clumps on the bottom or on the sides, that's not going to get absorbed, and then your recipe might be a little bit off. So just make sure it's really mixed well. There's no wet flour. And that's all I have to do this morning. So now I'm going to get ready for work, and I'll come back, see you guys about 5 o'clock. All right, so I am home from work. It is about 5 o'clock, and I am going to resume the process that I started this morning. So here is the levain that I started this morning. So as you can see, we've got a really good rise. It's very bubbly and active, which is exactly what I want to see. Now we're ready to start making our dough. So I'm gonna get my scale ready and my mixing bowl. That's it. All right, so I'm gonna add in my levain. And this should end up being about 165 grams. And look at that, if you can't see it, I am right on the money at 165. So that means it definitely got to the point where it is well mixed, well fermented, and ready to start mixing up our main dough. So to clear that, so then we're gonna add our water for our dough mixture. So this is going to be 635 grams of water. So this recipe is actually going to yield 2 loaves of bread. And you may have a family that eats 2 loaves in the time that it would take for the bread to start going bad. Or you always have the option to freeze. I do that occasionally when I know that we're probably not going to eat a lot. I'll take a loaf and I'll freeze it, and it still turns out really yummy. All right, so I've got my water added. So I'm gonna do a little mix, start breaking down the levain that we made into my water mixture. It just makes it easier to mix. You don't get clumps of gooey starter mixed in with your dough that you have to break up. It just makes it a little bit easier when you dissolve it in the water. And my water is lukewarm, so you definitely don't want cold water, because temperature is so important when you're making sourdough, especially when you're talking about a natural fermenting process that happens. The colder the ingredients, the colder the temperature, the longer it's going to take. The warmer, the faster it's going to happen. So you just want to make sure that you do have lukewarm water, not cold water, because then you're going to end up having to wait more time before it's ready for the next step. So we got our water added, looks great. So I'm still going to be using bread flour and whole wheat flour. So we are going to add 160 grams of whole wheat flour.
What are you making? Mom, what are you making?
Bread. And now I am going to use, I have to open up another package here. We're going to use quite a bit of bread flour. So this is going to be 766 grams of bread flour. And I know it looks like a lot, but once we mix it all down, it's going to look great. See if I can get there without breaking another bag of flour. Oh, I'm so close. So now that I have all my flour added, I'm going to use a dough whisk. So I have found that before I start mixing with my hands, this makes it a little bit easier just to get the ingredients combined together, because this is a very wet dough. It is very high hydration. So sometimes it can be a little hard to work with, especially in the beginning until you get everything mixed in together. It can be a little challenging to deal with it with your hands because your hands will get very sticky very easily, and sometimes this just helps speed that along without having to get super sticky hands. So I'm trying to get all of that flour incorporated into my wet mixture. And I'm almost there. So this is about the stage where I will start to utilize my hands. So when you're working with wet dough, it is actually very helpful to have wet hands because it does not stick nearly as bad when you have wet hands. So I'm gonna wet my hands a little bit. And I'm gonna get in here with my hands, and I'm really just gonna kind of scoop and fold, squeeze it just a little bit, make sure all of my flour, scrape down the sides a little bit. I want all of my flour incorporated in, no dry bits stuck at the bottom. So just kind of scooping, folding around, getting a good solid dough. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I am going to let this sit for just a few minutes. I'm gonna let it rest for about 20 minutes, and then we'll be ready to add our next ingredient. All right, so I have let this sit for about 20 minutes. It's really just an opportunity to let the dough start coming together. It's actually not a super critical part of the stage, but it does make this mixing part next a little bit easier. So I have 2 more ingredients that I'm gonna add to my bread. So I'm gonna get the scale back out here. So I'm going to add 19 grams of salt. So I have fine sea salt here. You don't have to use fine sea salt. It's just what I typically use. And then I'm also gonna measure out 50 grams of water. Now I may not end up using all of this water, but if I get in here and I start seeing that the dough really needs to be a little bit moister, then I'm gonna add a little bit more water. So I'm gonna add a touch of water right now to kind of start dissolving that salt. And then we are gonna get in here with our hands, and we are gonna start mixing and incorporating this salt into our dough. And I'm gonna do this for about 5 minutes. You don't have to do it in the bowl. You can put it out on the counter if you want to. Just keep in mind, it is sticky and it will make a little bit of a mess on your counter. Sometimes it's easier just to keep it in the bowl, but it's completely up to you. So basically, I'm just mixing it together and I'm building strength in the dough. So you notice how my dough is kind of falling apart right now? That's what we want to fix. We want to build some elasticity in our dough. So I'm just gonna kind of squeeze and massage these really hard points in my dough. Sometimes you'll feel like little hard nodules inside your dough. And so you just wanna kind of gently, notice I'm not being rough, I'm just kind of gently massaging and squeezing and stretching as we go. Kind of doing what we call stretches and folds as I go as well, kind of folding over, giving a little tug, building some tension. And I'm gonna do this for about 5 minutes. So now you can see I've lost a lot of those holes that were in my dough. My dough has really started to come together. It's very much getting more difficult to kind of bend it over without really pulling on it. Whereas before it was very loose. Now when I pick it up, you see it very much kind of stays in a ball. And that's really what you're wanting to see at this stage. You want to see it coming together, kind of pulling against your movements a little bit. That just means you're going to get really good dough strength, and that is going to continue to improve throughout the fermentation process and really result in a great loaf. So I am looking at it at this stage. So I'm going to move my dough into a different bowl. You do not have to do this. A lot of people will just keep their dough to ferment in a mixing bowl. I actually like this bowl a lot because it's got a wide edge. And so when I come in just a little bit to do my stretches and folds, it's really easy to get to the dough. So I'm going to kind of shape my dough just a little bit into a ball, just kind of going around, pulling gently, kind of getting it into a round shape to fit the bottom of that bowl. And now we are going to let it rest for 30 minutes. And then we're going to come back and we're going to start building more tension with a stretch and fold.
Can I do that?
All right, so it has been 30 minutes. So we are right at 6:15. So our dough has started the bulk fermentation process. And so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start wanting to add some elasticity and some strength to our dough as it's fermenting. So the easiest way, because this is a very wet dough, is you do want to kind of get your hands wet. This is going to be the easiest way to work with this particular dough. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to give it what's called a stretch and fold. There's another method called coil fold you can use. I just like this one. So I'm basically going to stretch my dough out and I'm going to fold it. Turn my bowl. I'm going to do it this way. Give it a stretch and a fold. My hands a little bit again. You can see how much our dough has changed just in 30 minutes of fermenting. You can see the strength already starting to build as it's kind of resisting the stretching just a little bit. Just want to give it a good stretch, very gently. You don't want to pull or tear your dough. You just want to start kind of building some of that strength. Okay, that's it for 30 more minutes. All right, so it is 6:45. We're gonna do our second set of stretches and folds. I'm gonna wet my hands a little bit. See, my dough's kind of spread out since the last time we did it. So I'm gonna do a stretch. It's a lot tenser. That's what we want to see. It's almost at this point, if it's got good strength, it should be resisting my pull quite a bit, and it is. So I'm still being very gentle. I don't want to be rough. I'm not trying to stretch it out. All I'm trying to do is just give it some strength. So I'm just kind of slowly and gently pulling, folding. And this one, it's barely pulling at all. That's great. All right, so this has about 2.5 hours left to ferment, but for right now, we are done. All right, so it is 9:15. So just a reminder, we started this process at about 5:45 when we started our bulk fermentation. And so it's now 9:15. You can see where the dough has risen significantly. I can see some bubbles right here. I don't want to pop those, but we are ready to go ahead and start shaping our loaves. So I'm going to just very gently scrape this out. Actually, before I do that, we're going to flour this surface just a little bit to help it not stick. And this is just regular all-purpose flour. You can use rice flour. Trying to be very gentle. All right, I'm gonna get just a little bit of flour on my hands, dust a little bit over the top. It just helps things not stick. And then I'm gonna take my bench knife and I'm gonna cut the loaf in half. It's still gonna be a little bit sticky. Perfect. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pre-shape my loaves. And after I pre-shape them, I'm gonna let them rest for just a little bit. So I'm gonna take my bench knife and I'm going to build a little bit of tension. So I'm gonna take it and kind of use it. I'm gonna scoop and tuck very gently. But I'm gonna kind of make it as tight as I can. About like that. I'm gonna do the same thing to this one. Just kind of tuck, tighten it up. And we're going to leave these right here for about 30 minutes just to settle before we go ahead and shape them and put them in our baskets. All right, so it is 9:45. I've given my loaves 30 minutes to kind of relax and rest. You can see there's some bubbles starting to form on the top, which is a very, very good sign. So I'm gonna put just a little bit of flour on my hands and I'm gonna flour my round bubbly baskets. So I just like the round shape, but you can also do these in the oval bannetons as well. A little bit too much flour on that. All right, so now we're gonna shape our loaves. So I'm gonna take it, and I'm gonna very gently, without bursting the nice little bubbles, if possible, because that's what's gonna give me a really good crumb. So I'm gonna take it and we're gonna shape these. So basically the way that I shape a round loaf is I take it and I pinch it together like this. Just very gently pulling, kind of tugging, pinching to kind of seam this together. But I want to create a good tension so that my loaf stays very tight as it's proofing. And that's what's going to give me a very nice rise. Pinch this up a little bit more. Just going to pinch and seam. And I'm going to take this and very gently put it in my basket and just make sure we get some nice tightness. All right. And do the same thing here, just very gently kind of roll it over so the sticky side is up. The top is kind of dried out a little bit while it was sitting, so it's not very sticky. Do the same thing. We're going to do a little bit of folding and just kind of shaping it into a round shape. Pinching at the sides a little bit. Trying to create that tension. Very gently put it in my basket. Again, I got a nice bubble right there. I always try not to pop the bubbles, but sometimes you can't help it. This one I might just have to maybe try to fold that over just a little bit. Perfect. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover these and we are going to do a cold proof. So I'm actually going to put these in the refrigerator overnight, and they will not get baked until tomorrow evening. when I get home from work. Just make sure you get a nice good seal. I've also seen people, I have not used this, but sometimes people use shower caps to cover their bowls. I've not tried that yet, but this nice press and seal works really, really well for me. It gets a nice tight seal. It doesn't come undone in the refrigerator. It keeps everything nice and ready to go. All right, into the fridge we go. All right, so we are back. I got home from work about 30 minutes ago, and I immediately started preheating my oven. So I preheated my oven to 450 degrees, and I put my combo cooker in my oven as it was preheating, so it's very hot, because this is what I'm going to bake my loaves in today. So I pulled one of my loaves out of the refrigerator because it has been in there since last night when I put it in there. So I'm going to take off the plastic. Now, one thing you will notice with a cold proof is that you're not going to see a whole lot of rise in your bread like you would with a warm proof. And that is okay, because what's going to happen is it's going to rise as soon as it gets into the oven. So I'm going to use a sling that I have, silicone sling. You can also use parchment paper. I'm just going to do like this, do a quick flip. Parchment paper works fine. You can also do something like cornmeal on the bottom, so that way it doesn't burn. You just want to be careful about it burning. So I'm going to put this in the shallow portion of my combo cooker. I'll slide this in just a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and score my loaf, and then it's going in the oven. So when you're scoring your loaf, I'm going to do a very simple score. You've probably seen lots of very nice, fancy scoring. I'm going to do something very, very simple. I'm going to take my lame and I'm just going to drag it along the side right here. And the purpose of the scoring is that when the bread is baking, it is going to start rising and it's going to start releasing gases. And if you don't have somewhere for those gases to go, then your bread can end up misshapen and lumpy. It'll all spread out on one side. And so this kind of gives it a place where it can easily release those gases, and it looks beautiful when it's done. So you can see I've got a nice, pretty deep score there. That's all I'm gonna do. I'm gonna keep this super simple. I'm gonna put the top on, and it is gonna go in the oven for 25 minutes. All right, so it's been 25 minutes and I have just taken my loaf out of the oven. So we are going to remove the top, and I'm actually gonna put the top back inside the oven because I do want it to stay hot because I have another loaf to cook. You can see right here where it has started to split and it started to rise right there. So that's perfect. Now I'm gonna stick this back in the oven for 20 more minutes. All right, so we have 2 minutes left on my 20-minute timer, but I always like to really check the oven around this time because you definitely don't want it to get burnt. So I went ahead and took it out just a couple of minutes early. Of course, it's very hot, so I'm gonna use my hands here. So you can see that that's our loaf. You see we got a really decent oven spring here. Not as good as I've had it in the past, but it actually has been very cold in my house, so it may not have gotten the bump that it needed to really get really high. But you can see we did get a nice opening there. I feel a very crunchy crust, which is awesome. So I'm gonna take it out of the pan, I'm gonna put it right there, and I'm gonna go ahead and start my second loaf. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that if you've been thinking about trying to start something like sourdough, that this encourages you, that it can be done. Even if you're a working mom, even if you feel like you're busy, it is not overcomplicated. You don't have to overcomplicate it. Just try it out and see. It takes some practice, it takes some trial and error, but don't give up, keep trying. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'll be posting more videos coming soon, and like and subscribe to my channel, and I hope you guys have a great day.